Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here today for this, the update Chief Carl is going to give on the terrible incident that took place on Monday. Even on a day when most in our country are celebrating the hope and optimism of a new administration, we here in Toledo are still in mourning, and will be for a long time, and the hurt we feel will last forever. We for the second time in 6 months lost an officer in the line of duty. Officer Stalker was a fantastic officer, but he was also a great dad and a great person. You know, he taught his, he taught his daughter how to roller skate. Almost every Sunday he was there at Ohio State teaching her. He loved baseball, was good at baseball, really good. And in fact, just recently went back to Whitmer High School to help coach. This is a person and a family with deep roots in West Toledo and the Whitmer High School neighborhood. And we, as a city, as a department, we will never get over the sadness that we feel in our hearts right now. The incident that took place on Monday, and I know there's a technical phrase for it, the chief will know, but essentially this is sort of a barricade situation where a negotiator has to be brought in. In 2020, there were 16 of those events. I think that would surprise many Toledoans because although events, negotiation events where there's a standoff, for lack of a more technical phrase, happen a little more than once a month in our community, the fact of the matter is the media and citizens probably weren't aware of any of the 16 events that took place last year because they were resolved the way that we all want them to be resolved. We have a great police force and a great team of negotiators and professionals who 16 times last year were called out to 16 incidents, and in all 16 of them we had an outcome, the outcome that we wanted, so much so that they were never reported on, never gained the attention of the public, and that's how it should be. What happened on Monday, our officers followed the exact same procedures, exact same rules. They know how to do it. They succeed every time, almost every time, and every time last year in negotiating these situations the way we want them. But on Monday, we didn't have the outcome, obviously, that any of us wanted. We're prompted, of course, to ask the question why. It's not that any procedure wasn't followed properly. It's not that our team didn't do what they did 16 times last year excellently and without notice. It just, sometimes it just may be a mentally ill individual who acts in a way that no one can predict with the worst possible outcomes. And I suppose as I turn it over to the chief, I might say, as I wrap up my remarks, while I am still heartbroken and sad, my emotions over the last 48 hours have slowly turned to anger. I'm angry that there is something about our system, not so much locally, because there's state law that's involved, there's federal implications, but something's wrong in our system where you have a suspect, the chief will talk about him in this case, who by his family's admission was suffering from some sort of mental illness. Those aren't my words, those are the words of his family and loved ones. They believed him to have a mental illness. They attempted to get him treatment. And how can a person whose family believes to be suffering from a mental illness, how could that person obtain 2 legally registered handguns? How is it that sometimes HIPAA laws prevent our officers from knowing that a suspect at a situation is mentally ill? I know we have to protect people's rights to privacy, but I believe that we need to redouble our efforts at the state level and maybe federally to make sure that our officers can know when they encounter a situation. If there is someone with a documented mental illness, someone who's been through the system, I want our officers to know that. I don't want HIPAA regulations standing in the way. Those are conversations for another time. But the anger I feel, I know, is shared, and all of us in public life, whether you are a legislator, a governor, president, senator, we need to work to make sure that our officers have all the tools they need to succeed. And I know we're going to commit ourselves to doing that. But the chief wants to, those are bigger picture, longer term concerns. And at this point, I'd like to turn over to the chief for him to give his presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, we will do the same format that we do in previous officer-involved shootings. Before I start, I'd like to recognize Councilman Delaney, who's here today, my Assistant Chief, Mike Trenley, and Officer Mike Haynes and Officer Vince Manera, President and First Vice President from the Toledo Police Patrolmen's Association, as well as Chief Brian Bird from TFRD. So we'll go ahead and start with the presentation. Again, in the past, the history is repeating itself. What you're going to see is some graphic content, some inappropriate images and words, so please keep that in mind if you're live and with your viewers. We'll start with Officer Stalker. Officer Stalker was hired in July of 2018 and has 2.5 years of service. He is our 32nd officer who's been killed on the line of duty. Officer Stalker leaves behind his fiancee, Ashley Ulmer, and 2 children, ages 7 and 3 months old. Some information that led up to this to the incident. On January 18th at about 2:23 in the morning, officers were advised that flames were coming from the front doors of Rosary Cathedral. The word "Jesus is Black" was painted multiple times on the front exterior of the church. Based on this information, the incident was investigated as an arson, vandalism, and racial, religious, and ethnic intimidation, what we refer to as RREs. Later in that day, a Crime Stopper came in to our detective bureau that provided information linking a male named Christopher Harris to the arson, vandalism, and RRE. Probable cause was determined and warrants were issued for Harris. Just to note, he had vandalized other properties recently with sayings consistent with what was found at the church, and it has also been known to stand on the corner of Bancroft and Ashland holding a sign that stated "Jesus is Black." At approximately 12:34 in the afternoon, a warrant service was attempted at 2234 Fulton Street, which was Harris's last known address. At that time, he was not located. We're going to move into the radio transmission right now from the Rosary Cathedral in the morning.
310, I could copy.
1 in Melrose, it's got flagged down my wall. What's up, man?
You gonna be all set, 310?
No problem, man.
Copy. 310. Go ahead. Could you start 5 fire our location. Here at Rosary Cathedral, it looks like someone may have attempted to set the church on fire. We smell gas at deeply. Copy. 310, can I get 305 on this, please? And 310, did you say you saw flames? Yeah, there are flames and we smell gasoline. It looks like they are underneath the door. We're gonna circle the property and see if we see anything. Copy. 321, I'll start you that way. 321.
One copy, we're on 20.
Okay. As you can see, the map, Fulton Street here in Columbia, that's the address where the barricade happened. The suspect, Christopher Harris, 27-year-old black male with the last known address of 2234 Fulton. His criminal history includes aggravated arson ×2, which were open warrants, criminal mischief, which was an open warrant, ethnic intimidation, which was an open warrant, vandalism ×2, which were open warrants, and drug abuse possession of controlled substance, which was a 2014 conviction. All open warrants were issued on January 18th, except for one of the vandalisms that was issued on January 8th. Harris vandalized his own apartment by spray painting the walls before he moved out. Now, before we move on, I want to bring something up that I've heard comments questioning why I did not identify Mr. Harris Monday night. At the time of our press conference, I was told that his next of kin and family had not been notified of his death. And I made the call that it was not appropriate to have that family find out that a loved one was dead by a press conference by me. So I made that call. If you remember, the mayor came over and we kind of had a little huddle, and I asked him not to do that. So that was my call. Some more details of the shooting. At about 3:53 p.m., our afternoon's gang units observed Harris outside of 2234 Fulton Street where he was smoking. They approached him and he was observed to have a firearm. He fled and barricaded himself inside the home, and this is when we called out our critical incident negotiators and our SWAT team, which is our normal procedures. Additional officers were utilized for crowd control and crime scene protection as a large crowd began to gather. These officers were stationed along the perimeter throughout the scene. Officer Stalker, along with other officers, were utilizing marked vehicles as cover. Now I want to talk about some information on our negotiators. We have 12 negotiators, which is led by a lieutenant. They have 40 hours of certification training and are required to go through quarterly refresher trainings. The trainings include reviews of critiques and any new incidents since their last trainings, updates on national trends or protocols, and participation in scenarios. On occasion, we try to hook up our SWAT team with our negotiators since they work pretty much hand in hand at times so they can have real-world scenarios. As the mayor said, 16 times our negotiators were called out in 2020. Seniority in negotiators range from 10 years of seniority to 37 years of seniority. The hierarchy it's kind of designed to be a hierarchy this way. There's a commander, a primary negotiator, a secondary negotiator / coach, a scribe, and intelligence officers. So we require 3 at every single call out. Their goal is to gather information about involved parties from law enforcement sources, from family and friends, and to also keep a two-way communication with loved ones at the scene. Now, some important social media posts that the suspect was putting out. He's also known as Danny Love on his social media platforms. Some of the posts that you can see include, I will legit be setting the world on fire soon. Take heed and enjoy the moments with your loved ones. Particularly important, don't worry, I'm not going to go to jail. They're going to have to kill me. And, excuse my language, the bitch is going to burn down. Posts about the standoff with the police are also made and indicates that it isn't even on the news. He also mentions that Jesus is black, which was also found on the spray-painted walls. Here's some more. I just want to point out the one He obviously wanted to make sure that this made the media, so he put that out there. Negotiations with Harris lasted approximately 2 hours. It could be heard by officers on scene that he was not going to be taken into custody. Harris made statements as, "I'm only going to talk to Donald Trump, Governor DeWine, or the mayor." He also mentioned that he is Jesus and he is God. After Harris remained uncooperative with the negotiations, chemical agents were deployed by our SWAT team. At approximately 6:22 p.m., Harris emerged from the house with a firearm in both hands and began firing shots in numerous directions. In fact, I read the Blade this morning, and there was a witness on scene who was quoted to say, "He came out guns a-blazing." One of these bullets tragically struck Officer Stalker in the head. Within moments, 5 TPD SWAT members fired multiple rounds from their department-issued rifles, ending the threat. Immediately, 2 police officers and 1 Toledo fire lieutenant began rendering aid to Officer Stalker. Officer Jeff Dorner, who is a detective in our arson unit, who is also a tactical medic and EMT. Officer Adrian Wilson was trained in the Air Force as a combat lifesaver. Sergeant Mike Watson lended aid, and TFD Lieutenant James Trevino, who is also a paramedic and another member of our dual TFRD, TPD arson unit. Officer Stalker was immediately transported to Mercy by TPD officers, where medical staff worked tirelessly to save him. Sadly, Officer Stalker ultimately succumbed to his injuries. We're now going to show the dash video from car 184 that was pointing at the house. The video will begin a few seconds, and then you'll see Harris exit the home. You'll see the door slam open, and you'll see the shots. This also is the vehicle that Officer Stalker was standing behind when he was tragically killed. The house to the left, you can see the SWAT team on the side of the house. Now watch the front door where the light is. Here, door pumps open, shots fired. And the suspect is down. A lot of people are asking about body camera footage. We're not going to be providing any. Ohio Sunshine Law Chapter 3 states that the release of body camera video that shows the death of a peace officer that occurs during the deceased official duties will be withheld. And now we're going to talk about the officers. Officer David Marsh, 7 years experience, 40-year-old white male. In our SWAT team, no active discipline in his file, and he did fire his service weapon. Officer Adam Nags, 10 years, a little over 10 years experience, a 40-year-old white male, also attached to our SWAT team, no active discipline in his file, and he did fire his weapon as well. Third officer, Officer Gregory Linkus, 10-year, 42-year-old white male, again attached to our SWAT team, no active discipline, he did fire his service weapon. The fourth officer, Officer Brian Jackson, 7 years of experience, a 35-year-old white male, also attached to our SWAT team. The only active discipline in his file is he had a verbal reprimand because he didn't turn on his microphone on his body camera during a traffic stop, and he also fired his weapon. The final officer, Officer Ben Kaiser, 8 years of experience. He's a 35-year-old white male, again attached to SWAT. He has a verbal reprimand in his file for unnecessary use of physical control techniques, reporting use. He fired his pepper ball gun and did not report it. And he also fired his weapon. We're going to now show, these are the 2 weapons that Harris had. Did we show the first one?
I'm sorry, sir, that's the first one?
Okay. And there's the second. Again, you can see here, there's where the weapons were recovered. Now we're going to show our APC. It was hit 5 times, one in the wheel well here, and 4 times on this hatch. Now, that's kind of the important one that I want you guys to talk about. There was an officer standing there. Officer Brian Jackson was standing behind that. If that hatch was not there, we would be burying 2 police officers on Tuesday. Again, you can see where it's been hit in there, 3 times there, and the light bar that is on top was shot out. Final notes, Harris fired both firearms for a total of 9 rounds. Both firearms were legally registered to him. It was a 9mm Taurus and a 9mm Ruger. 19 rounds in total were fired by Toledo's 5 SWAT officers. Harris was struck 8 times. Now, before we move to questions, I want to take a moment to thank the nurses and doctors, EMTs, paramedics that worked on Brandon that night. I was there the entire night, and I watched with awe. They were, for lack of a better word, incredible. They did everything humanly possible to save him, and I just wanted to say personally thank you from the Toledo Police Department for their heroic actions. If there are any questions?
The Seashore Wood Department situation was an issue of mental health. The family says that Christopher Harris had mental health issues, so this is 2 incidents in a row. What do you think needs to change in our, maybe this is even a question for the mayor as well?
Well, I think it's a bigger question for society. We had no CIT call-outs with Mr. Harris, but listening to his mom, reading his social media posts, I think I'm not a mental health clinician, but it seems to me that there was something going on there. That's a big issue, and if I had the answer to that, I'd be a rich man, but you're right, mental health does seem to be an underlying factor in both of those.
Chief, so he fired 9 times, the
Yes.
suspect? 5 hit your vehicle?
Was it 5 or 6 that hit the vehicle?
5
Five hit the vehicle, and 1 hit Officer Stalker.
Okay, do you know where the other ones?
I don't know that now. They may have missed everything that could be in houses or the ground or the porch where the suspect was standing.
Okay. When we watched that video that you had up there, and I think maybe the public has some questions, like how did he fire that many shots in that short amount of time?
Well, as fast as you can pull the trigger on a semi-automatic handgun, bullets come out of it. So if he comes out firing, I mean, just practice on with your hand. You could fire. I could empty my magazine and my weapon right now in probably 4 seconds at the most.
How many shots did that be?
17.
So when he was coming out of the door, was he firing as soon as he opened the door?
That door came open and he was coming out.
From what you've been able to gather information-wise, obviously you can't get it from him. Do you get the sense that he was trying to shoot police officers, or do you get the sense that he was just shooting to shoot?
Well, seeing that he hit a police officer and hit a vehicle 5 times, it sounds to me like he was trying to hit the police.
When it comes to the perimeter procedure, is there anything that's going to change? I know that there were a large amount of people that you guys were trying to manage at that time. There were dozens of people who were looking on to the scene.
That's a huge concern for us because the last thing we want is to get innocent people hurt at a barricade. So some of the things we do while the negotiations are going on is we'll go door to door and we'll evacuate people out that we can talk into leaving. Or at the very least, we'll ask them to go to other sides of the house. We don't want innocent people to get hurt, so we try to set an inner and outer perimeter that are far enough away that if, God forbid, something happens, the damage will be minimal. But he
Can you repeat the questions?
Oh, okay. The question was, is there anything that we're going to change differently when it comes to outside perimeter security? As you can see by the video, the vehicle was 100 feet away. We want to make sure that we have our perimeter set at a larger distance, at a large enough distance, rather. So what we do as a matter of protocol in something like this is we'll sit down in a week or so, and we'll go through every inch of this, and we'll say, okay, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? Is there anything we can tweak? But that's the thing about these. They're all different. We try to do the exact same things the exact same way, but we have to deal with what we're given.
When you were negotiating with the suspect, were you on a phone with him? Were you using a bullhorn? How did that go?
I believe it was a phone. And the way it was going in this day, he would answer the phone, he would talk for 30 or 40 seconds and just wildly incoherent statements and then hang up. And it would happen again and again and again for about 2 hours.
Did he have any family there at the scene?
I know for sure his mother was there. I don't know if his brother were there or any other family members were
Was
there.
she in contact with him?
She was standing next to one of our captains, and I saw on the news this morning that she indicated that she really wished that we would let her go inside that house, that she felt that she could talk him down and he would never hurt her. I appreciate her wanting to help her son, and I get it. I'm a parent myself, but there is no way on God's green earth that I'm going to let someone into a barricaded house where we know the suspect has a weapon and he has made homicidal threats on Facebook. I just cannot put her in that predicament, and I would not let that happen.
Have any of the prior barricaded gunman incidents that happened last year, did they escalate to this kind of level?
You know, the question was, has any of the prior barricaded suspects incidents escalate? I don't believe we've had any times that we've had to use fatal force in all of the ones last year.
Is that number from last year typical for an average year to have those types of situations?
Anywhere from 16 to 24 in a year.
Chief, is there ever any point where, in consideration of the charges, we're talking vandalism and arson, is there ever a point where police might say, let's just step back, give it some time, we know where he is, we'll come back later?
Not when we know he has a gun and he's making all of these statements. We would have been complicit if something horrible happened after that. There's no way, after our officers saw him with a gun and we saw the social media posts, we couldn't simply back away. And I get it. That's the frustrating thing here. These were property crimes. Yes, it was against the cathedral, I get that, but these were property crimes. And if we wish we could have Mr. Harris handle things differently, but unfortunately we have to deal with what he presented to us.
And Chief, not long before, the first homicide of the year was actually on the next block. Is there any suspicion that Mr. Harris may have had anything to do in that case?
Not at this stage. I haven't been briefed of anything like that.
Lieutenant Gergen said no, sir.
Okay, no.
Where was Officer Stalker set up? Was he behind a door, behind the SUV itself?
He was behind the driver's side rear of the vehicle, making sure that he had the entire vehicle as covered. I mean, there's a difference between cover and concealment. Concealment is I can hide behind a piece of paper and you can't see me, but it's not going to save my life if someone shoots. Cover is he had an entire 2,500-pound SUV in between the suspect and him. He put his head out to look and tragically was struck.
Okay, so the bullet didn't go through the vehicle,
No.
it went to the side? And
No.
When Mom was there with your negotiators, did Mom ever get to talk to him directly at all?
I don't know that. I can find that out for Shem, but I don't know.
She did not, and it's not common procedure that we would allow that.
Okay. You heard Lieutenant Lenhard. That's not normally our SOP for that, but I will check and make 100% sure for you.
Now, can you kind of explain the dangers of people working perimeter? And can you also clarify, I know a few years ago we had Detective Picking who was shot as well. Was he working perimeter duty when he was shot?
Detective Picking was standing by a police vehicle. He was in vice at the time, and he was waiting for our SWAT team to make the entry. The suspect at that time shot at our SWAT team and went through a window and hit him. So he wasn't doing security at that time. Let's be honest. When you're at a barricaded gunman who's saying he's not going to be taken alive, whether you're point man on the SWAT team or you're outside security around the corner, there's inherent dangers here. That's why we train the way we do, and we try to take everything as serious. We don't want to be complacent in things, and tragically, something as fluke as this happens.
Chief, this is the second time in 6 months, departments having to go through this. How are officers responding, to go back out on the streets right now? How tough is that for them?
It's tough for them, but I don't think I've ever been prouder. We have officers, you remember Officer Stalker and Officer Dia were from the same class. So their class alone is reeling, but our officers are coming in, they're in a state of shock too, and they're hurting and they're numb, but they're coming and they're going out and they're doing their job and they're protecting our residents. And I couldn't be prouder of them and how they're behaving and how they're handling this. We have a very young department, age-wise, and you know, we're talking 25, 26, 27-year-old men and women that are losing friends and brothers and sisters, and they're acting and they're performing flawlessly. I couldn't be prouder.
And then Chief, you say you take, you know, personal responsibility for anything that happens to any of your officers. Is there anything that can be done to protect them more?
That's one thing that is always on the front burner for me. We always looked to, just last year we bought the SWAT team new helmets. An officer at the scene Monday asked me, is there any way that we can purchase ballistic shields for each of the police cars? We're going to look into that. Their safety is my #1 priority. That, and a close second, is controlling crime in the city. But making sure that they go home every night is what my job is. And when that phone rings and I hear something like that, I can't describe to you the feeling.
Have you taken any commonalities between Officer Diaz's incident and Officer Stalker's incident that maybe you can pass along to the rest of your officers of things to watch out for, anything to be careful of?
No, we were talking apples to orange. Officer Stalker was doing outside security, or perimeter security rather, and Officer Dia was responding to a drunk guy who was harassing people. So we're not talking similars, but what it does show is that you can never be complacent for any call for service, whether it's a barricaded gunman, whether it's a prowler call, whether it's a drunk. We have to keep our sixth sense up and never take anything for granted until we're sure that there's nothing that can hurt us at that scene.
And Mayor, as far as resources for people in communities, inner cities, minority communities, do you think that more needs to be done as far as getting help for them with for mental health issues?
Well, I do, and I've said that before. You know, we have a mental health system in this county, and you know, I can't speak for them. The director or board members aren't here, but I know we need to do better across the board. Here are the facts. This is someone whose family believed to have a mental illness. Talked very openly, I believe, talked to, I want to say it was Channel 11, but it was, I know I saw it on TV, of her efforts over the, I don't know about years, but efforts over a period of time to get him to go seek help, to go see a psychiatrist. That this is someone who wanted, whose family wanted him to seek care. And the community needs to get better on getting that mom's desire to have her son get to a psychiatrist. That connection has to happen. And the fact, you know, this is someone who had those 2 weapons that he obtained them legally. They were both registered to him. Those guns never belonged to anyone other than him. In other words, they weren't passed through some black market. And yet this person was, his family believed him to be mentally ill. Well, the system didn't know that. He never went, he would not have had a mental illness red flag on him because he had never, gone through this. So the answer is yes, and that's something that I think the whole country is struggling with. I don't know if I'm going to have another chance to speak. There's one other thing I wanted to say, and then we can have more questions. The chief and I talked earlier today about the proper way to honor Officer Stalker. We don't know what that will be yet, but you can expect in the relatively near future that we'll be announcing a way to keep his memory alive and to bestow honors upon him. So that will happen. Don't know what they will be yet or when it will happen, but it will happen. And though we're not ready yet to announce the date and time, I think we can announce that there will be another community gathering at Savage Hall to honor Officer Stalker's life. Reached out to the president of the university yesterday, and they're, again, very generously going to make Savage Hall available for a community gathering, which will be next week, but I don't think we are ready to announce the date and time yet. So look forward to that in the next week.
Please follow, are there any additional resources being offered for officers at this time for mental health or counseling, anything like that?
The question was, are we offering resources to our officers regarding mental health for this? And thank you for asking me that. We, the night of this happened, we called in the Northwest Ohio Critical Stress Incident Management Team, which is a group of police officers from Northwest Ohio who have been specifically trained on grief, not grief counseling, but grief counseling, for lack of a better word. They come, they're at our roll calls, they'll be at our roll call right now. They're there at both Scott Park and Central, and they simply are there to talk, and more importantly, to listen. They have a little bit of credibility because they are law enforcement officers, so this team, I'm telling you, we have officers from Oregon, we have UTPD, we have Lima, and they give up their time to come and help us, and vice versa. People that are on our department that are on that team would go out if something happens there. So yes, and in addition to that, we have our normal EAP and Lighthouse that we can use, and our peer support team. So as we have been moving from decade to decade, we're not just worried about our physical health, we're worried about and concerned about our mental health. And this is a very stressful job. So keeping our officers mentally and physically fit is one of my big priorities. So thank you for asking that.
And I imagine you can't speak one-on-one to every officer at this point, but is there anything that you want to say to them about their service or about, what they've been through?
The question was, can I, even though I can't speak to every officer on the department, is there anything that I want them to know? I want them to know that I pray for them every night. I care for them. I love their families, and they may not agree with all of my policies and procedures, but their safety and their dedication to this job it makes my heart warm, and I can't speak enough. If you follow anything that I do on social media, you know that I'm not shy to say one proud chief here on good deeds, and I think that's about that.
Chief, speaking of policies and procedures, you said, we've suspended the one-man crews after Dia. Is there going to be any change possibly after this incident?
Well, remember, this wasn't a one-man car incident. This was an hour-long evolution. We have changed that. I mean, I think I said this on our last press conference. I simply don't have enough officers to do that. What we have done, of our 8 districts, 5 of those are mandatory two-man vehicles. The other ones, we've changed the ages for the officers. They can't work a one-man car until they have 3 years on the job. They can't work together until they have a certain time on. So we're trying to mitigate the dangers with experience, and we'll keep reevaluating as manpower dictates.
I guess to rephrase that, is there anything that you could change that would possibly,
Change this? No.
Chief, is there anything else that's being done to help Officer Stalker's family?
More than I can tell you. When something like this happens, you never realize how amazing the community is, how amazing other police departments and fire agencies. They're going to be taken care of. I think we all saw when Officer Dia was killed in the line of duty, the outpouring of support, donations, money, fundraisers was off the chart. I have no reason to think we're going to see any different for Officer Stalker.
One more question on the negotiators and the response on that afternoon. Is there a certain time or a certain point in the negotiations when they decide the gas needs to be used, or what goes into that decision to say it's time for gas?
In this case, they knew pretty soon that this person was not rational enough to actually participate in a negotiation. They're going to do everything they can humanly possible. The good thing about a barricade is time is on our side, and we use that as long as humanly possible. But it's going to get to the point where, okay, let's try to end this and get it over with and move on and try to get the person the help that they need, or if it's not mental health, it's obviously Lucas County Corrections Center. So Yes, after a certain amount of time, it's up to the individual negotiators. I mean, they've gone through the training. When they realize that this is a no-win situation, that nothing that they use is going to work, then they'll turn it over to the tactical commander.
About how many feet back was Officer Stalker at the time when he was strapped?
I didn't measure it out myself, but just by looking at the video, I would say about 100 feet.
Chief, I understand prior to Officer Anthony Dia, and then of course, Officer Stalker here, it was 2007, the last time an officer was killed, in Toledo here. So, how do you explain two back-to-back like that? Is it an increase of mental health issues? Is it, this anti-police rhetoric that we've seen? How do you
I
explain
think
that?
it's a combination of all of that. I think it's a combination of COVID-19. I think it's a combination of too many guns. It's a combination of no criminal trials for the past 15 months. We're not putting criminals in jail because of, understandably, I don't want to make judges mad at me, but there has to be a time where we start holding suspects who we are arresting for violent crimes. We have to take them to trial and put them in jail. It's a combination, and quite honestly, there's a lot of people out there who just don't have respect for the police anymore, and they think they can act with impunity.
Thank you so much. I think we'll call it a day. All right. Thank you all for being here.